Hello, Elizabeth here, and today I'm going to show you how I made these customized plush name blocks. My nephew Brody is turning 1 and his name has 6 letters, so I put one of each letter on each side of each block. But if you are making these for a child with a longer name or a shorter name, you could just put all the R's on one block and all the O's on another block. And if they have a name with less than 6 letters, you could put some images like hearts or flowers or dinosaurs or whatever you want on the other sides of the block. I made these blocks out of old t-shirts and I cut the fabric using my Cricut machine, Rotary Blade, and the fabric grip mat. I also cut the letters out of Cricut heat transfer vinyl, which I ironed onto the pieces before sewing it all together with my sewing machine. They're just stuffed with polyester fiber fill and then a tiny bit of hand sewing for the final gap at the end. So today I'm going to walk you through each of those steps and how to make your own custom blocks. Let's do it! First, I set up my cut files in Cricut Design Space. I went to the Shapes menu in the side toolbar and inserted the square shape, resized it to 3.5 inches, and duplicated it so that there were 6 total squares. I made the letter images with a free font in Canva and uploaded them to Cricut Design Space. I resized them to be 1.5 inches wide and made 6 total duplicates of each letter. I made the squares gray and the letters yellow so that Cricut Design Space would sort them onto separate cutting mats. Then I hit Make It, rearranged the squares so that they would be spaced a little farther apart on my 12x12 mat, and set the base material to cotton. When you select cotton, it tells you to load the Rotary Blade in Clamp B. This is what the Rotary Blade for the Cricut Maker looks like. Mine came with my machine. It has a very sharp circular blade that is meant for cutting fabrics. I had my fine point blade loaded in my machine, so I just opened up the clamp and swapped it out for the Rotary Blade. If you have a different type of Cricut machine than a Maker, you can still cut fabric with it. The process is just a little more complicated. There are plenty of video tutorials on how to do it. Alternatively, you can cut the fabric by hand or purchase pre-cut fabric squares. Next, I took this blue V-neck and cut out a large section of the back side of the shirt. I used a pair of fabric scissors to cut along each side seam of the shirt to get this nice flat rectangle. Then I trimmed it down to be about the size of my 12x12 fabric grip mat. I did this easily by folding the edge to the right size and putting a crease in it with my iron so I knew exactly where to cut. Once I had the fabric down to size, I peeled off the protector sheet from my fabric grip mat and carefully applied the fabric to it. The fabric mat is pink and is made especially for fabric projects. You want to try to avoid touching the adhesive with your fingers because the natural oils on your hands will break down the adhesive and shorten the life of your mat. I very carefully lifted the edges as needed to make sure there were no wrinkles in my fabric, and then I was ready to cut. It's okay to have a little bit of excess fabric hanging down at the bottom edge of the mat, but you don't want to have any overlap on the top or side edges of the mat, or it can clog your machine and really mess things up. Trust me, I did it. It wasn't fun. Next, I loaded my mat into my machine and started the cut. This process is incredibly satisfying. The Rotary Blade is so sharp and it just glides right through the fabric and you can hear each slice as it cuts. Oh baby, it's awesome. Or maybe you don't get excited over these things, which is perhaps a normal reaction. So once you unload your mat, you can see the lines that were cut in the fabric, and then you want to gently peel off the excess, which is also very satisfying. And just look at those sharp lines on 6 perfect square shapes. Flawless. So to remove the squares, I just take a pair of tweezers and grab a corner to peel each one off. Again, you want to be careful not to touch it too much with your fingers, so this is an easy way to get around that. You'll notice there is a little fluff outline of the squares after I removed them from the mat, and that's normal. That happens with the fabric grip mat. It's all good. Next, I prepared to cut out the letters. I'm using a basic white heat transfer vinyl for the letters. I selected Everyday Iron-On as the base material, and you always want to make sure to mirror your design when you're using heat transfer vinyl, because we actually cut from the underside of the letters, which is what ends up laying flat against the fabric when we do iron it on. Cricut automatically spaces out the letters to save the most vinyl, so I did some rearranging. I knew I wouldn't be making all 6 of my blocks at the same time, so I arranged the letters so that I would have all 6 letters I needed for each block in vertical lines. This way I could just cut each strip and then weed and cut out the letters for each block as I went, instead of weeding it all at once. Then I applied my heat transfer vinyl shiny side down to the mat. Again, always shiny side down with heat transfer vinyl so that you're cutting into the actual vinyl and not the carrier sheet that we will be putting our iron on top of. Make sure the fine point blade is back in your machine, load the mat, and start the cut. Once my cut was done, I used scissors to cut the first strip of letters BRODIE, weeded all the excess vinyl, and then cut out each individual letter. Then I used my iron to smooth out any curled edges or wrinkles on my fabric squares. Next, I arranged each letter in the middle of the squares and was ready to start ironing on. I set my iron to the cotton setting and set it on top of the letter for about 30 seconds with a bit of pressure. Then I flipped the fabric over and applied more heat on the back for another 15 seconds and set it aside to cool. I repeated this with all 6 of the squares. Once the vinyl was cool to the touch, I gently peeled back the carrier sheet. If any of the vinyl is coming up with the carrier sheet, you'll need to apply a little more heat to that area and then try again. Once all your squares and letters are good to go, you're ready to start sewing. I used my sewing machine to sew each of the blocks. I did it by putting the letters face to face and sewing the edges together with just a straight line of stitches so that the seam is invisible from the outside. If you're picky about the order the letters go in and having them all face the same direction like I am, make sure you triple check that everything is facing the right way before sewing to avoid having to rip out seams or start anything over. Once I had the 4 sides sewn together in a row, I did the same thing with the top square and the bottom square, sewing each of the edges together with the letters face to face. Make sure you get a really good seal on each of the corners. For the final edge, I sewed about halfway with my machine and then carefully flipped the block inside out. I used polyester fiber fill to stuff each block. You can make them really firm or a little bit squishier, it's totally your preference. Once I had them stuffed, I hand sewed that final opening shut using a thread that matched the color of the block. I just separated small pieces of embroidery thread for mine because I have it in a million colors, and hand stitched it shut. Honestly, I'm not the best at hand sewing, so my little closure is not as nice looking as it probably could be. But as long as there are no gaps and everything is nice and tight, you should be good to go. And you can repeat this process with as many blocks as you're making. I think these are such a great gift for babies. They're nice and colorful, they're soft, they can grab onto them, toss them, and hopefully one day spell their name with them. I think my nephew was quite happy with his, and I got a ton of inquiries about these from other parents. So if you're looking for a unique handmade baby gift, I think this is a fun one. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you enjoyed this video and you would like to see more DIY tutorials, please subscribe to my channel and leave a comment letting me know what you would like to see next. See you later!